would know somewhat about me. I guess if we're admitting fears this evening, I don't have a fear of public speaking or things like that, but this here machine, this computer in front of me, I mean, that is a fearful machine. I don't know how to run computers particularly. Yeah, as far as Rupert's introduction, somewhere between 7, 8, one of the things that stood out to me about Rupert is he always had a car to fix. It seems like you're never done with maintenance on the mission field until one day he said he had everything fixed. He was all done and didn't have any projects lined up. And I think that there were a number of projects lined up almost immediately after he said that. Thank you. So there's a couple of verses that I'd like to, well, not just single verses, a couple of passages, we should say. John chapter 7, verse 37. Some powerful words here. John chapter 7, verse 37. On the last day, that great day of the feast, Jesus stood and cried out, saying, "If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. He who believes in me, as the Scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water." I'd like to start the presentation this evening with a challenge. What is flowing out of your heart? I'm here to tell you what God is doing in the corner of Guatemala where we're living, but it's not my work. One of the mistakes that we make as Christians is we start a little project or a mission, and then we ask God to bless it. And my prayer through what we do, my prayer as we move forward is not that God bless what I'm doing, not that God bless my ministry, but that we be able to understand where is God moving and get in step with Him, and that God bless His work. There's three things in this life that are eternal. God is eternal, God's Word is eternal, and men's souls are eternal. Invest in these three things, these three areas. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, starting with verse 1. To everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck what is planted. And we heard in the message this morning about a time to plant and a time to pluck, a time for everything. Verse 3, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to break down, a time to build up, a time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, a time to dance, a time to cast away stones, a time to gather stones, a time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to gain, a time to lose, a time to keep, a time to throw away, a time to tear, a time to sow, a time to keep silence, and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. What profit has the worker from that in which he labors? I have seen the God-given task with which the sons of men are to be occupied. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work of God, the work that God does from beginning to end. And interestingly enough, that phrase, he has put eternity in their hearts, is true. It doesn't matter if you're an evolutionist. You try to explain eternity with millions of billions of years. I mean, God has put that in men's hearts, and they can't get rid of it. They're looking for something. And so there is a mission field around every Christian. And from their interior, if they will get in step with God, will flow a river of living water. So, I'd probably better start with a summary of a little bit of a summary of the history of the work in El Chal. So here's a map of Guatemala. Petén is the northern department or state of Guatemala. MAM would have originally started the work in El Chal, and a number of years ago, Jungle Breeze's youth ministry started up. To have a boys' ranch was the main focus, and MAM offered Jungle Breezes the work in El Chal, since various different reasons in play. And the upshot of that was Jungle Breeze's youth ministry, JBYM, took over the school and clinic in El Chal, and the congregation became a local congregation, not necessarily under a mission group. And we are privileged to be members in the local church there and support with whatever is happening in the local congregation there. Holly came to El Chal the end of '99 to work as a nurse, and after my stint here with Delvin and different occupations here in the States, I went down in 2006 to study nursing, and we got married and started our family down there. Somebody's asked me, or people have asked me already, what do you do? And sometimes it would be maybe easier to answer what I don't do as far as work down there. We have cows, both beef and dairy. We run a small food stand. We have a food stand rented at the clinic. And both Holly and I are involved in the nursing aspect. So lots of things to do. Here lately, over the last number of years, one of the things that has started to happen more and more, and God has given us a vision, a burden for this, and that is to be support for other missionaries. Not just we get phone calls. I don't really classify myself in the age of a grandparent, but having grown up in Guatemala, I know somewhat of the culture. I know the ropes, so to speak, of stuff. And so then also being nurses, we'll get phone calls from other missionaries, and we will try to advise them as to what the best line of approach is to whatever the problem may be that health or be that where you go in town to buy nails or whatever it is. Helping other missionaries further kingdom work. So in the last few months, we felt God's leading to no longer work directly for the mission and the clinic down there, but to try to expand a little bit along the health lines, have a healthcare facility that complements what's already what the clinic is already doing. So we have more and more people doing day jobs, and the clinic currently operates during working hours. So if you go to the clinic, you'd have to take off work to go there, and then also focus on supporting other missionaries with whatever questions they have, whatever they can call us, and continue to work with young people. And I'm sure many of you do this as well. You incorporate in your daily living discipleship. And so in the food stand, we would have some young girls working for us and try to disciple them as they're going through their Christian experience. And we've been privileged to do that. So let's start going through the slides that we have. Some of them are simply pretty pictures. Not many of these pictures can be attributed to me. I have a few of them in here, but I'm not somebody that goes around taking pictures. This would be a view off of our porch. Our house sits up on a little bit of a knoll, and in our community, the place is known as Benja's Hill, and we have a lot of good scenery around us. This map is of Petén. El Chal is more or less in the center. We have a homestead property where we would run some beef animals, and then close to that is another dot, El Mango. Every other weekend we would travel on Saturday, travel up, do a bit of work on the homestead property, whatever project, work a few hours there, and then spend the night in El Mango and help the missionary family there on Sunday with the services the next day. MAM also has an outpost in Santa Rosita, Dean Ball and his family. Then in San Francisco, there's some Holderman Mennonites. In southern Petén, there's El Zapote, Jason Bontrager and his family, and Ivan Yoder and his family would be there. So there's a fair amount of conservative Anabaptist presence in Petén, and over the course of a week, we would talk to a fair amount of these people. Tiana and Ruben. Tiana would be my sister. They live in San Bartolo, and there's another group of missionaries in Coban. So what we do, life is ministry. Talked about this briefly. Nurses, bread shop, farming, education or discipleship. So as we're going forward, the picture in the background is of a building that we're considering renting to run the care center out of. So we're thinking about how this could work, doing urgent care, assessment by appointment, and then as well what I'd already mentioned, problem solving via phone, missionary care, and mentoring nurses coming in. The mission staff down there is very supportive of what we're wanting to do, and so currently, up to this point, Holly and I have been pretty much involved in teaching the new nurses coming into the clinic the different roles, the different things that we do in the clinic. So these are a few pictures in the clinic. One is a patient that whenever he comes in always gets passed on to me, and interestingly enough he calls me his son, and he's deaf. Sometimes he can talk very clearly, and sometimes it's all garbled up, but a very, very interesting man with a very interesting history. And then Lisa, our daughter Lisa, banged herself up, so pictures of me stitching her up. This would be, so in supporting other missionaries, this would be a load for a local mission hospital. They said and told me they had gotten a load of medicine in a warehouse up in Guatamala City, and if I could coordinate transportation for it up to Petén. So that is what this picture is all about. On the education side, or discipleship, family, obviously the most important mission field that anybody has is their children. So family and others. Teaching business, critical thinking. I'm sure you stub your toes over that every now and again. Something as simple as why do you put oil in gas when you want to run the weed eater? Doesn't it just run on gasoline? What happens if you just run it on gasoline? And so on. Teaching critical thinking isn't something that comes automatic. A lot of these skills we've been taught from a child up, and we don't really think about them being critical thinking skills. But when you get someone that is adult or almost adult, and you're trying to teach some of this stuff, it is interesting. So life skills, curiosity, sharing knowledge, learning by doing, be that blowing up a weed eater or chainsaw or whatever. I mean, that's learning by doing, and sometimes the tuition cost can be high. Bible as authority, and that to me is a foundational point on this whole thing. The Bible as authority. The Bible is God's inspired word. And you're in a dangerous area if you say the Bible contains God's inspired word. The Bible is God's inspired word. You don't just pick and choose. And then the 3 R's: reading, arithmetic, and I'm missing one. So this is a project that I did with my son Benjay just before it came up. We had pieces to a corn sheller sitting in the weeds for quite a number of years, and so he and I dug it out, and we welded up out of old pieces of sheet metal and stuff that I had laying around, and got an actual corn sheller working. And then the picture here of the cat, they found a tarantula somewhere and are trying to entice the cat into going after this tarantula. For those of you that aren't satisfied with being able to taste your food, some people like to have fire in their mouths. And these peppers here on the pictures to the right are some of the hottest peppers that I've ever run across. And no, I don't make a habit of eating them. I have tasted them, but I don't like them at all. We have a lot of pretty flowers and a lot of pretty chicks. This would be more my children's interest. One of the things that we do is take orders from all the missionaries in Petén that would happen to want apples. This year, if I remember right, I went and got 1,600 pounds and a full pickup load of apples. And then if they want to, give them a place to work them up at our house. So this would be Sarah Martin, one of the local missionary wives that decided to take us up on the offer and do her applesauce up at our house. And the picture to the right would be their adopted son. So once again, learning by doing, be that trying to make tortillas or learning information out of a school book. And of course, if you're a child and it's raining, well, it's fun to be outside. So here on the left is a tree without any leaves on it. A lot of our trees do drop their leaves this time of the year. So that would be the national tree, the ceiba tree, and it has orchids and different stuff growing on it that you can't really see what they are. Then on the pictures on the right would be caterpillar that you don't really want to touch. It'll give you a nice allergic reaction. And then on the bottom, picture a scorpion that you don't really want to touch. Oftentimes in dry weather, in the dry season, we'll find them hiding in our sinks. They go looking for water to survive, and so especially during the dry season, you watch out the places where there's a bit of moisture in the area. This year, thankfully, we were able to pour a floor in our basement, and the children love roller skating, and they set themselves up a little living room in there. Guatemala, especially Guatemala is a very diverse place. If I remember right, there's something like 23 Indian languages, different Indian dialects spoken. And in Petén, there is some very spectacular ruins that were made a couple thousand years ago. And this would be one of the temples in Tikal, a ruins that is about an hour or maybe a little more than an hour away from where we live. So as farmers, I get people consulting me more on the machinery side of things. When it gets into cattle, I consult them as to what works. So infrastructure and sustainable development. We have, as I mentioned earlier, a homestead, coconut trees, and we're starting to plant coffee in between the coconut trees, and then also a small beef operation. They're closer to the house. We have dairy. Benjay takes care of the dairy operations pretty much. So he makes, he with some of his sisters, so he makes the yogurt, would separate the milk and the cream, and then we'd also sell fresh milk. I was talking to Rupert a little bit about his cattle experiences, and one of the things that came out in our discussion, not necessarily about cattle here, but cattle in Petén particularly, is so we have two classes of cattle: European cattle, which would be your short-eared cattle, and then cattle with the Brahma or Indian blood. The European cattle will get loaded with ticks. A Brahma might have 10 ticks on it. The Europeans in the same field, same pasture, same everything, one tick will be looking at the other one and say, "Move over and give me a place to bite." Like, they'll be just covered with ticks. So it's something that I have to spray them for very regularly to keep that off of them. This cow here has an interesting name. We call her the goat cow. not necessarily because she looks like a goat or acts like a goat, but we traded her for, I don't remember anymore, 6 or 7 goats. The children and Holly had gotten into raising goats for a while, and I finally was able to talk them into trading them for a cow. And as far as I'm concerned, it's the best trade they ever made. And she does very, very well with letting the children milk her. So some of the yogurt making process. And then Benjay has started his own small beef herd, and these would have been a couple of his animals. With the food stand, you always have pictures of food. And then these pictures here would be making fence. We're still working at building infrastructure up on the homestead property. So this day the children were helping me string some high tensile electric fence. Kendra Lilly gave, another missionary gave Kendra a horse, and so she foaled. So the picture here to the left is the filly that this horse had, and then when Kendra Lilly left Guatemala, she gave this filly to our youngest, Junana. So every now and then, June wants to pet her horse, so we get her into the corral and let her pet. Benjay and taking care of milking. If I'm not there or some reason I can't take him out to the corral, he harnesses up the dogs and takes the wagon. And so even though he's not in the far north where there's snow, he has a small dog team that he uses to get around with. Now how do you make the... There. In the picture to the right, we can see a spider monkey bouncing around up in the tree there. So up here, when you have cows or beef, you make silage. So actually what we've got going on here is silage making operation. It's a 3-row corn harvester. So what they would do is chop the corn by hand, make big piles of it, and then bring a machine in and chop it. So this is a chopping operation that I did for my own cows. And at least Delvin would recognize some of the equipment involved in this picture. So another picture of Junana's colt. So camping food, we'd take dinner up and grill it over the fire at the homestead property. The coffee plants that we're planting, we got some coffee beans, sprouted them, and then the children got dirt. They were thoroughly sick of the project till we got all the bags filled and the coffee beans planted, or the little plants planted. And then we'd bring them up here to the homestead property and plant them between the rows of coconut trees. bread shop, point of sales. So it'd be more the food stand side of it. So we have a food stand at the Good Samaritan Clinic, the clinic there the mission runs. We have national staff working for us. Some young girls that had become Christians were part of the staff, and later on we'll see a picture of them. The patients a lot of times would come in for labs. We have a small lab there at the clinic. They would come in for labs, and then after they've given their samples and whatever, if they want to come out and buy breakfast from the food stand. Affordable, nutritious food for those who come fasting. Direct sale of the beef and dairy that we produce. Bulk products and healthy supplies for the North Americans. So a lot of times the missionaries coming down won't know where to get oatmeal or won't know where to get flour or whatever. So we've been a supplier of these things: baked goods, yogurt, fresh milk and cream, and a place to channel the energies of our 4 girls, and also Benjay, because he's part of making the dairy products. This would be a picture of the eating area of the food stand, and then some of the products that we make, and I'm sure that you can identify them without me blathering about it. By the way, if you have questions as I go along, feel free to speak up, and I can try to answer them. Not promising, but we can see if we have an answer for your questions. Do you have a reliable source of electricity? So actually, where our house is off-grid. We live about a mile, maybe not quite a mile outside of town. So our reliable source of electricity is called a generator. In town, yes, they have electricity. It's supposed to be 24/7, and I would say it's fairly reliable compared to what I knew as growing up. You can have a couple hours outage now and again, but it's fairly reliable.
How do you preserve your beef from the time you get it
So what years ago in Noviedo, where we would have been, where I grew up, Daddy set up a cooler room. So when I moved back down, that cooler room was still up there, and I swiped the main, the central components on it and built my own. So what I would do is kill the beef animal and hang it up in the cooler room, and then we would process it. Over those days, we would run the generator night and day, keeping it cool until we get it processed and in freezer. We've had some of the first beef that we didn't have that available, in moving cattle, some of our cattle are quite wild, and there's a breed called Nalor. Their spirit is is greater than their bone mass, and so they'll go berserk and rear up or whatever and break a leg. So we lost 2 animals that way, and that was before we had the cooler room set up. So that got quite interesting, trying to get everything cooled down and so on. So some people in our family really enjoy coffee. I have the line that if coffee tasted half as good as it smells, it'd be pretty good stuff. I enjoy coffee, but I'm not one of these people that can really pick and choose. But some in our family are. And so what we do is get in 100 pounds of the green beans and then roast it for ourselves and also to sell. So different food products, dairy, cookies. This would be a staple snack, tostadas. It would be like a corn chip that you would put sauce or beans or cheese or something on, and the locals really, really enjoy that. So we have, once again, the map of Petén with the different labels on it, and then here would be some of the different missions and locations that we would work with in what we do. So we have the local El Chal Church, then we have MAM, Santa Rosita and San Bartolome, which San Bartolome isn't in Petén, but we do a lot of back and forth between San Bartolome over the phone. Holderman Mennonites in San Francisco, JBYM staff in La Anchura, then Guatamala Light and Truth in Coban, which is not in Petén, and El Zapote, which is in Petén, and the Caribbean Light and Truth in El Mango. So we were very, very privileged to have a baptismal group last month. Our son Benjay was in the group. The two girls on the left are two of the girls that work for us, and yeah, God is good, and we pray that He continue to work and protect these young people as they continue forward in their spiritual life. So during COVID, and I'm sure it happened up here somewhat, but you couldn't get together, so it was kind of a social starvation, especially in the youth. So the MAM, one of the MAM churches in Mishkolaha in the Highlands decided to have a youth retreat. So since it was way back in the middle of nowhere, people could go back there, and there wasn't a whole lot of fear of trying to keep the guidelines and the masks and everything. And so here in the photo in the bottom right is the group that we had from El Chal. And we had a real encouraging, good time, encouragement. It was a real blessing. This would be a birthday party picture. All the ladies from our local congregation there in El Chal. And some girls from the Santa Rosita mission outpost. Some of these photos are borrowed from our good friend and co-missionary Judy Lehman, and these would be pictures of some of her students and some of her work in the school there in El Chal.
How much distance between your homes and your project up there at Homestead?
So it depends on how good the roads are. It can be 2 hours, 3 hours. I generally say 2.5 hours. Yeah. So where we are is lowlands. It's mountainous in that you have, like you can see out through here, hills. I call this the land of the thousand hills. It always makes me think of the song, Who Owns the Cattle on a Thousand Hills, because a lot of times you can see lots of cattle spread out on those hills. But each one of those hills is up to maybe 300, 400 feet tall, so not necessarily mountains as we know the mountain ranges here in the U.S. or even in the highlands of Guatemala where the mountains are quite high. So there's hills, but it's pretty much all lowland. And since we're up on one of those knolls, we have a very good view all the way around us. From where we're at, we can see storms coming in, whatever. If sometimes when I'm out working or whatever and I'm not up on somewhere where I can see, I'll call Holly and get the weather forecast. The fruit on the left here would be avocados. The sauce to the right would be what we call chirmol. You'd put it on beef that you would grill or chicken, whatever. Staple food is black beans. And then tortillas. This would be a tortilla stand. Interestingly enough, in the Guatemalan way of thinking, if you haven't eaten tortillas, you haven't really eaten. It doesn't matter what else you've eaten. So we'll have patients come into the clinic and they'll say, well, I haven't been able to eat for 3 weeks. And you look at them and you say, well, what else have you been eating? Because it's obviously been eating something. Well, come find out they haven't been able to get their tortillas down, so they haven't eaten. This would be a traditional kitchen. It's being replaced more and more by cement block. And this is what your corner store, Walmart, I don't know what you'd call it. Anyway, it's where you go to buy groceries. Tamales, I heard that some of you had some tamales here not long ago. This time of the year down there, everybody makes tamales and gives them out to their neighbors. So you'd make a few hundred of them and then you'd go and give them as gifts to all your friends and relations. So up here, you think of oranges as being orange. Down there, if you see an orange, probably you don't want it because it's going to be a little too ripe. Most of our oranges are going to be maybe a little bit yellow, but primarily green. So thank you for coming and joining and caring about what God wants to do through His people as we await for His return. I know the people here have supported us quite a bit. Kayla has come from here, and we really enjoy what she's been able to do as a teacher there with us. I'd like to share a couple of stories in closing. COVID has affected everybody. You here in the U.S., us in Guatemala. It's affected us in different ways, but it's one of the great events that will, in the future, I think, be something that you'll look back to and say when COVID hit. Well, we're already doing it. Your timing, well, that happened before COVID hit, or that happened just after COVID hit, or whatever. So a couple of the stories that happened because of COVID. When lockdown first hit in Guatemala, just after it started, we had a very sad story. There was an Indian family had moved into town a number of years ago, and so they were expecting a baby. And because of lockdown, not being able to move around freely, this Indian mother ran into complications, and so they finally got to the hospital, did a C-section, and the baby was stillborn. So because of the regulations in place, you couldn't have any traditional wake. The rule was that you had to bury the body the same day, and there could be no gathering, nobody could attend the funeral. So as soon as the baby was born, they handed the body to the father, sent him home to bury it. And as Holly and I heard about it, and we talked about it and decided that we couldn't leave, regardless of the regulations, that we couldn't leave them in the middle of this hard time. So she and I went out there, and there's the family. The older brothers, teenage brothers of this baby digging a grave. Evening is setting in, the sun's setting, and nobody around but just the government officials and the father, the family of the baby. They asked me to have the graveside committal service. The mom's not going to find out that the baby has died until the next day when the father goes in to pick her up. So very sad. Where are people's brains in all of this? You can scratch your head a little bit. The next story is a little bit more challenging. We had a bit of a COVID surge in 2019. Not extremely much, but then June, July of this 2021, we pretty much everybody in town got COVID, us included. And so right in the middle of it, when we were feeling pretty swamped at the clinic, I got a call from a friend of mine who runs a tire shop, and he's told me his mom-in-law has COVID, and he'd like me to go and see how she is and explain her medicines to her. And said, well, I'll be happy to stop by and see what I can do for her, but I can't take over treatment. I don't have the resources to do that, but I'll be happy to explain what I know and try to help you get started. So I went to this house. It's a blazing hot day. The sun is just shining down, and got to a house, low tin roof, and so I opened the door. The door was shut. I opened the door, and you get this wave of extremely hot, stifling hot air, stuffy air, and I went into the room. All the windows were shut. One of the first things I saw was a bed, and beside the bed, a nice big tank of oxygen. And it wasn't hooked up to anything. And then there's a lady on the bed, and she has a pulse oximeter on her finger. And so the numbers on the pulse oximeter, I was seeing, mid-60s on the oxygenation. And so I'm wondering what's going on here. So I asked her how she was. Well, she was feeling not too bad, but and talking with her, like, is the oxygen run out? What's going on with the oxygen here? And so in talking with her, the answer amazed me somewhat. It's such a comfort being able to have oxygen here if I need it. And I'm like, lady, you need it. So she said, well, putting the oxygen on it's irritating to the nose and throat, and it just doesn't feel nice. So like, well, I don't want to be mean. I don't want to be, but you have a choice to make. You're dying right now. The numbers on the machine tell me that you're dying. Your heart can't take that, but just so long, and it's not very long. You've got a choice to make. Are you going to suffer a little bit of irritation and put the oxygen on, or are you going to die? It's you don't have much time. I'll be happy to help you put it on and whatever. So then a whole conversation ensued before we she finally allowed me to put it on, and I stubbed my toes over some belief systems that are prevalent in the culture down there, and but eventually she allowed me to put this oxygen on her, and the upshot of the story, God was gracious, and she survived. As far as I know, she has no major side effects. But it impressed me. Here we have the fountain of life standing beside her bed, not hooked up, but very comforting to know that it's there. How many times are we like that in our lives? We have Jesus as our answer. Jesus offers us salvation. And it's such a comfort to know that all we have to do is reach out and he'll give us this salvation. But we let it go at that. How many times do we maybe know that we need to apply some scripture to our lives, but because it's uncomfortable, because it's irritating, we're hesitant to do that? So it's something that that was challenging to me in my walk, and yeah. Any more questions? If not, thank you for your time. Thank you for your support. God bless.